Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Today I thought I would just put up a little bit of random training footage of a couple different lifts and discuss negative reps. Because I had someone ask me, why aren't you controlling the negatives on your cheat curls? All right, they asked me that. And actually those are considered to be a reasonably controlled negative on most of these. But they are cheat curls. So they're going to come down a little bit faster, all right? They're going to come down a little bit faster. But the point we get to with some of this is people have this idea due to the bodybuilding world somehow that negatives have something magical or special. And people don't know what a negative means. We're talking about the eccentric portion of the rep. On a rep, you have the concentric or the positive, which means you're lifting the weight away from the floor, right? You're lifting it. You're contracting a muscle, moving the weight away from the floor. So whether it's a row, you're pulling it towards your chest. On a bench press, you're pushing it away from your chest. You are pulling or pushing the weight against gravity, moving it away from the earth, right? And then the negative or eccentric is the lowering. Well, there's a lot of mythology out there in different circles about, because of muscle damage and everything else, that the negative portion of the rep contributes to most of the muscle growth. And that's not true. And I'm not saying negative reps don't affect muscle growth, because they absolutely do. You can stimulate muscle growth doing nothing but negatives, right? You could have someone or a machine lift the weight and do the negatives on every rep and still gain pretty good muscle if the workload is sufficient. You're going to be a lot more sore though. And there are exercises to where the eccentric rep too controlled can hurt you, can actually injure you. But that's kind of a different story, isn't it? That's ultimately what it comes down to. We have exercises that are more concentric based, and we have exercises that are more eccentric based. They're both good forms of exercise. They both build muscle. They both build strength. What people need to understand is that this is a theory based upon muscle damage, because we know that you get more DOMs and you get sometimes more connective tissue micro tears as a result of the negative portion of a rep. Well, the problem is that the whole muscle damage theory of muscle growth hasn't actually panned out that well. It hasn't panned out that well. And the way it actually turns out when it's been looked at in studies, negative reps aren't necessary for growth. And really slow negatives don't produce any more growth than fast but controlled negatives. In other words, there have been studies that actually have gone and checked, and this has been done years and years ago. This isn't something that's been done recently. Like, I don't even know if I could find these if I were to dig for them. This was stuff that I was reading in physiology texts 15 and 20 years ago. So this is how long this has been studied. That they had been doing studies and to see if you got more muscle growth with a 1 second negative or a 4 second negative, right? Doing large amounts of exercise. You know what they found? That when workload was sufficient, 1 second negatives produced the exact same amount of muscle growth as 4 second negatives did. So the slower controlled negatives didn't cause any more muscle growth. They did cause a little more soreness though. So if we're talking about doing these really slow negatives, like watch these overhead press, that's, 1/1000. 1 second negative. That's all you need. That maximizes muscle growth on the negative end. It's just part of your workload. When you do it really slow or a lot of really eccentric base, like let's say you do a cheat rep. Like if I were to do these as a push press so that I could go 20 or 30 pounds heavier, right, for the same number of reps. So I did a push press up to cheat it up, then I did a 3 second or a 4 second on the way down, right? Controlled it. I would get a hell of a lot more sore, and you start equating that out, that's a lot more time on your sets. You're just wasting time. You're doing things that are just wasting time, particularly people doing really high reps. It's going to already be a waste of time. It's just going to make you sore. It's just going to make you sore. The truth is, the reason the negative contributes to your muscle growth is that it adds more workload, right? That's it. For example, if you were to only do, like let's say you let it drop really fast, and no control at all, right? No control at all. Super fast on an exercise, or you just turn loose. You're going to find that you need to do more reps to get the same amount of muscle growth. But doesn't that make sense? You're using muscle fibers on the way down, but what people need to remember, the eccentric is easier. You use less muscle fibers on a controlled eccentric than you do on the concentric. unless you did a cheat rep. So if I did a push press, what would happen? It might be harder on the eccentric to control it because I cheated and used a leg drive to drive the weight up more. But if I did a strict press like you guys see me doing in these videos, what would happen? The eccentric is easier. Less muscle fibers get recruited on the way down, therefore less total growth potential. But it is still fatiguing fibers. It is still creating metabolic fatigue. It's still recruiting muscle fibers. Therefore, it still contributes to the total training stress of the set. So the amount of muscle growth that you're getting from the eccentric versus concentric rep is largely relative to the amount of muscle fiber recruitment happening, right? Because let's come back to this. Guys want to over confuse muscle growth. This is why rep range has been found not to matter. You know why? Because 10 reps to failure recruits the same muscle fibers that 5 reps to failure does on the last rep. Right? Recruits all the same muscle fibers. They're identical. The body didn't tell them apart. Now, the workload tension part of the earlier reps matters. The weight on the bar is going to matter for certain strength components. But as far as the muscle fibers are concerned, you just fatigued all the upper threshold fibers pretty much the same. That's why you couldn't lift the weight anymore. They're very similar training response. It's all about muscle fibers, guys. This has been overcomplicated. So on a cheating exercise, the eccentric might have more impact on your overall muscle growth, but on a strict exercise, it actually has less than the concentric does, right? So it depends on the exercise you're doing. And there are exercises that are intended to be concentric only. The Pendlay row, deadlifts, now to some degree a push press in many ways, but unless you try to control the eccentric. But here's what's been found when research has been done. When people do studies on concentric-only training versus eccentric-only training, both are capable of producing maximum growth. But when you do only one versus the other, you need to do more reps and more total work to get the same growth. And it makes sense because you're doing less work on each rep. If you only do the up or the down on a rep, you're obviously doing less work with the same amount of weight, right? This shouldn't be difficult to understand. Less work, less muscle fiber recruitment. More work, more muscle fiber recruitment, right? It really is that simple. But people have made it into something more complex than it is. And it's just not based on reality. And whereas we've seen certain coaches, like Glenn Pendlay's done a lot of stuff to where he has his lifters bulk on concentric-only training for the most part. People say, well, why would he do that? Because he can throw a lot more volume at him with less soreness. Now, would I ever recommend a concentric-only routine for a non-elite athlete? Of course not. You're going to spend extra time in the gym. You're going to have to do twice as many total sets because he's not having his guys do reps. They're doing low reps with heavy weight. You end up having to do twice as many sets, but you get twice as many sets without the extra soreness. But it's just more training time. It's more training time spent. So it's not efficient, but it might make sense for someone who's in a concentric power-based sport who's trying to maximize muscle size and maximize performance in their given sport that muscle produces. That makes sense, doesn't it? So a lot of this comes down to what's the reason you're doing it. It's oftentimes sport-specific why we might pick one or the other. But they don't produce similar muscle growth. It's all just about workload. Then there are exercises that are both eccentric focused and then exercises where it's dangerous to do a slow eccentric. It's dangerous to do a slow eccentric on a deadlift. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise. Oh yeah, you can just do 4-second negatives on a deadlift. I don't recommend that you do that. That is a good way to strain erectors and stuff in your back. That is a good way to get hurt. You don't do that. If you want to do an eccentric based deadlift, do a Romanian deadlift. But you see, there's the difference. We have exercises that are intended to be eccentric focused. So if a person was really trying to do some stuff to get extra eccentric work for hypertrophy or whatever, because you can also get a stretch reflex on some of those eccentric based exercises. Like take the Romanian deadlift. That is an eccentric version of a concentric based exercise, right? The deadlift's a very concentric based exercise. Romanian deadlift is both eccentric with a stretch reflex at the bottom, a stretch reflex in the hamstring specifically. So if a person had lagging hamstrings and the deadlift wasn't growing their hamstrings enough, an exercise like that worked in could make a massive difference, couldn't it? Because then you get that large eccentric component, the stretch reflex. For someone with lagging hamstring development, they're a weak link for them. That exercise could be a fix. So eccentric-based exercises have their place. But this idea that doing a slow control, really slow negative on your reps is going to make you bigger, that's bro lore. That's bodybuilding mythology that's not supported in the research. It's not supported in elite level athletes. That's just not reality. A little bit of eccentric work can have its place. Eccentric overload can have its place in hypertrophy. Absolutely. But it isn't as terribly important as it has been made out to be. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.